right, everyone. Welcome to the Customer Success is a Lie series, powered by Customer Success Revenue Frontier. My name is Tamika Brunetti. I am Managing Director at Ascent Social Capital, and I have the distinct pleasure to moderate this session focusing on time to value. False promise, initial value does not equal sustained value. Now, the upcoming conversation is between two customer success thought leaders, Deidre Williams, the Chief Customer Officer at Customer Success Revenue Frontier, and Anthony DeShazor, Founder and Chief Architect for Protea Revenue Systems. Now, before we get into our proper introductions for our speakers today, let's review the session takeaways. Now, the focus here is all about time to value. So you're going to learn about shifting from time to first value as well as time to sustained value. Talk about what CS should be measuring, what those key measurements look like, how CS should actually use those measurements, and as always, there is a free bonus, a time to value worksheet. Now, I will pass the floor to Deidre Williams.
Thank you, Miss Tamika Brunetti. And she is my digital swagger coach. So anything that I do that is well done, I have to blame Tamika. And if I'm failing, it's my fault completely. So thank you very much for being our moderator today. As Tamika said, I'm Deidre Williams. I'm the Chief Customer Officer for the Customer Success Revenue Frontier. I like to tell people I spend a little bit of time on the cloud and then a little bit of time at Ariba on a particularly interesting island. But what I'm most proud of are the things that are associated with my brand. And I'm usually thought of as a thought leader. But the most important person on this call is Mr. Anthony DeShazor, because it is because of him that we are doing this entire Customer Success is a Lie series. So I'm going to turn it over to Anthony.
Well, thank you. I'm Anthony DeShazor. I spent time at several companies in leadership of customer revenue. Now I'm an independent consultant out there helping companies build a real customer revenue engine that's repeatable and sustainable. So it's not just a one-time growth, but how do you make this success a general practice? I'm also an ambassador for Winning by Design's revenue architecture. So I dabble in a lot there, but most importantly, I'm the controversy in most rooms. I say the things that tend not to go over easy until you think about it. Then you go, oh, wait, maybe he's okay. Maybe that's right. So I expect a good debate today.
We are looking forward to it because the term I often use is provocateur. All right. Are we ready to dive right into this? Okay. Let's start off with, we know that pretty much everybody that's dialing in understands what time to value is, but we really wanted to level set and make sure that this is sort of our basis point, and then we're going to expand from here. So time to value, and this is focusing on customer value, is how customer success views this is measuring the time it takes for a customer to experience the value of a product after purchase or after completing onboarding. This in itself is the first slide. Now, it says it helps customer success teams understand how efficient their onboarding process is, identify pain points, and refine the customer experience. But there's so much here to unpack. I know, Anthony, you said that there were some things about this that you were not particularly happy about. Is there anything you'd like to focus on with regards to this official definition, which, by the way, comes from the Customer Marketing Intelligence Group?
Yeah, when I look at this, particularly after working in an outcome-based company so long, this is generally correct. But what's missing here is that time to value might be time to revenue in some cases, because that's what I was looking for in my outcome-based company that I worked for last. It's how do I get this customer to the point where they're receiving enough value to generate revenue for the company. And that's not necessarily the same thing as time to value as most people read it. So I think there's an element of how does time to value tie into revenue? And that's what I'm missing in this conversation. It's a nice to have. The research says if you decrease your time to value, you generally will increase your customer lifetime value. But I always look at that and say that's general. It's not specific to an individual or to your company. So you have to do that detailed research to tie time to value to revenue, not just the customer experience, particularly if you're going to make major investments there.
I love the way that you frame it, and I love that you're bringing in customer lifetime value, because that is actually another one of the myths that we are going to be talking about in future conversations as part of this series. So I hope everybody tunes in for that in a few months when we cover that one. I think the challenge I have with time to value is two things. First, when I initially brought this subject up, probably in a post a couple of years ago, I used this as my customer success 5.0 as one of the top 5 things that we should be focusing on for customers. And I immediately got people that literally hit me on LinkedIn saying, but you're only talking about it from a customer revenue standpoint, which is absolutely positively correct in that we should be focusing on the revenue piece of it. But the other piece of it is it's time stamped in that we need to get them to value at onboarding. And what is often lost is that entire customer journey after we onboard them. So yes, revenue should be the focus from our perspective as leaders on a customer success perspective. But what we should also be focusing on is driving continued value for that customer after we onboard them and after they purchase that initial product and service. So are we ready to dive right into the myths versus the reality for customer success TTV?
Well, there's one thing.
Oh no, he's got more. He's got more. Wait. Okay.
But this is why I think there are two different metrics.
Yeah.
There's time to first value, as you talked about, which may be what's associated more with onboarding. And then there's time to sustain value or continue value, whatever you want to call it, that's maybe more associated with adoption. So whenever I see this time to value definition, I always ask, is that first value, sustained value? Which value? Is the 5th year value, 9th year value? Which value?
Absolutely. I love that. And I think that the metrics we're going to dive right in speak to that precisely, because that to me is where we fail as customer success professionals in some cases, focusing on that finite timestamp value versus that continuum that goes throughout the customer lifetime. So spot on. I love that. Anything else on this one?
No. No debate.
I felt like that was a little bit of a debate. Okay.
Maybe.
All right. So the lie, the lie that we're often told is that we get customers to value quickly. They'll adopt, they'll renew, and they'll expand. So we talked a lot about that in the previous slide. But the reality is this speaks exactly to what you just said, Anthony. TTV only measures initial value, not sustained value. A customer can reach first value quickly and still churn for a variety of reasons. So let's kind of look at that. So if we look at the value wasn't strategic, or the product wasn't embedded in the workflows, or the customer's business objectives changed, or the sponsor left, or the renewal value wasn't continually enforced. How do you want to unpack any of that? Or is there anything specific that you just want to dial into?
This is I think the origin of this whole series, because we had a conversation and I really took to task the research that says if you decrease time to value, customers will adopt, renew, and expand. I agree the research is directionally correct, but what the research shows is probabilistic, not deterministic after facts. So what does that mean? That means that from the research, the people they surveyed, the people that provided the feedback, X percentage of them saw their customers adopt, renew, and expand after decreasing time to value. But I've worked in companies where that did not hold true, where we could absolutely decrease the time to initial value or even decrease the time to sustain value, and it did not actually impact whether or not they renewed, they expanded, or they adopted. Because we're in a commoditized space. And when you're in a commoditized space, driving them to value is not necessarily the deciding factors whether or not they stay with you or go with one of your competitors. What we found in those scenarios is that it was time to value plus a bunch of other things. And so I always have an issue with this because I believe the research is generally correct. But you have to take that next step to figure out whether or not the general guidance actually is real in your specific use case.
And what you actually said is time that TTV is a lagging indicator. Yep. And so that adoption, that renewal, and that expansion is the result of a variety of other factors. And to your point, though, is I think where we as CS leaders and our CS teams have a challenge with this is just because they hit that marker where they do these three things, they adopt, they renew, and they expand. The assumption is because right after we came out of onboarding, we had a particular milestone and they met that milestone. What we have to do a better job of is looking for these other signals that actually get them to do those things like adopting, renewal, and expanding. That's the complexity of this, and that's something that's often missed, and we're going to talk about that in subsequent slides.
Ooh,
Yeah, I
can I
think
jump
that's
in
the
here?
biggest issue.
Oh yeah. Oh wait, Tamika, please jump in. What do
Well,
you got, please?
so Gopal, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but Gopal said in the comments, the elephant in the room is the very definition of value in my experience. It can mean
Oh,
different things to different
Yes.
customers,
Yes.
oh,
even
Thank
with
you.
the
Thank you.
same
Thank you.
platform app,
oh,
and can also change with time and depending on who you ask.
yeah,
Thank
oh.
you for teeing that up. Thank you for teeing that up because I was
We're
Spot
going,
both
on.
I was
like,
going. Yes.
we're
Thank
like,
you,
yeah,
Gopal.
let's go for it. Let's go for it.
Yeah.
But
Okay. So wait. Yeah. No. Okay. Go ahead. Because I got a lot
he
to say about that.
speaks to the absolute issue is
Yep.
that there isn't one definition of value.
Correct.
There really isn't. Even when you talk to a customer, value will be specific to their persona and their role.
Yes.
If you're selling into an enterprise customer, the people using your software are likely not the same people who are deciding to purchase or
Correct.
renew your software. And so
Correct.
when you talk to the people that are using your software, they have a different definition of value than the
Right.
people who are deciding to renew. So you have to now figure out which value matters. And that is where I think a lot of teams get mixed up. They're defining value based upon the people they talk to versus figuring out the different strata of value based upon the org structure. You have to be multi-threaded and you have to network your way or be introduced to the decision makers to really decide or really understand what matters for the company. I'll tell you this, you can't ignore the users, but if you ignore the decision makers, you're going to lose the account.
That no, 100%. And thank you, Gopal. I cannot see who the who's in the chat, so we apologize profusely if we're mispronouncing the name, but you are spot on. And also, it speaks to the first bullet because, to your point, we have different levels to your as you define it as different personas that are utilizing our products or services in different ways for different specific reasons, but regardless of how much they may have adopted it, regardless of how much they may see value at that level, if the particular product or service is not strategic, and if it's not embedded in the strategic drivers for that particular company, that particular decision maker's definition of value might be inherently different from your ultimate end user. And that's something that we often fail to look at when we're looking at time to value. Absolutely.
I have to add one more.
Oh, please.
There's
Yeah,
an
please.
element of this that we don't really factor in, and that is perceived value. What I
Yeah,
mean
good
by
point.
that is
Yeah.
that if it's, yes, they got to $1 million in savings, that's what they were looking for, that's the value they wanted. But if it felt to them that they had to spend $5 million in effort to get that $1 million, I don't care what you put in an Excel spreadsheet and telling them, hey, you saved $1 million. They're going to tell you, I don't feel it. So you
And that,
have to really look at the perceived value because they're going to make decisions off of what they perceive, not off what a spreadsheet tells them.
no, that actually 100% I think speaks to bullet number, our final bullet. The renewal value wasn't continually enforced because I've worked with customers where we were embedded strategically, we were a part of their workflows, we define their desired business outcomes, and I won't talk about the sponsorship piece because we're going to get into that when we get to stakeholders. But then when we started talking to their leadership, their perceived value clearly was not the same. And they felt like they'd had to put so much work to get to that point to see the ROI for that, even though they might have hit that milestone, the LOE for them was not where they wanted it to be. And they've still decided that at renewal time, the perceived value was inherently different from the actual value that was achieved. So anything else on this one, because we're going to dive into what metrics we should be looking at that get us to TTV, but aren't necessarily TTV itself. Anything else on this? Or Tamika, do we have any other questions that you want to bring up as far as this one's concerned?
There's
But
no,
that was a
no
fabulous,
there's no questions in the comments, but I have a question. Um,
please.
and of course, right when you say please, it flurries away. So it'll come back to me. Continue.
All right, not a problem. That's what we're here for. We got time. Okay. All right. So we talked about earlier the lie and the myth, and then what the reality is. Let's talk about what actually helps us predict churn from a customer success perspective. So value milestone progression. This again speaks to that continuum that you talked about, Anthony, and that sustained value. So what you really want to be looking at as a metric is the percentage of your customers that are reaching multiple value metrics, that multi-threading that you talked about, not just that first one. And then the second one we want to look at is usage consistency, meaning frequency and the regularity of core feature utilizations over time. And what I mean by that is I think about when I was on the cloud, we made the distinction between adoption and utilization. And what that meant for us was we had customers that were adopting. I would get adoption ratings at 80% or higher, but they weren't actually utilizing the service, or their utilization wasn't embedded enough for them, again, to that point that we made previously, where they truly saw value in the products or solutions that they were using. So not just looking at the adoption, but how they see value and how they're utilizing the core features over time. So I don't know, Tamika, if you have any questions for this, or I'm going to turn it over to you, Anthony, because I know you have a lot to say with regards to these two metrics. Oh, he's laughing. Oh no, it's almost, there's that
Let's
provocative
go with
aspect.
Anthony.
Go for it,
So
Anthony.
if we go to the kind of like the mistakes I see a lot of customer revenue or CS leaders make is they look at the average time to value. And the problem with averages is that it really ignores or tries to even out the outliers to your benefit sometimes and to your detriment. In my last company, the CEO walked into a room and we were having a leadership meeting and talking about some changes he wanted to make to the customer journey. And he got to onboarding and time to value. The metric he came up with, what shocked me, but changed the entire way I looked at it. He said, instead of looking at the average time to value, we want to figure out what percentage of our customers actually got to first value within a targeted amount of time. And what that did, it forced us to make the process more repeatable, because while we may be able to get there by having, a few customers really nail it, and that offset the customers that did not. So by looking that time to value as a percentage of customers who actually reached value within a certain time, be it first value or sustained value, that's a better way of measuring it, because it tells you how repeatable the system is in a way, but it also tells you what the majority of your customers are experiencing. And so I loved going the route where you track by, maybe by ranges. Hey, maybe it's from 0 to 5 days, or maybe it's 1 to 3 days, or whatever the right range is. But you then take your customers and put them in different buckets based upon their range to value, and then figure out what percentage of your customers fit in each of those buckets. That will give you a better idea of the actual sustainability and repeatability of your process than an average would.
No, and I love that. And I think that that sort of speaks to what we did was when I was on the cloud, our focus was, as I said earlier, the distinction for our customers between utilization and adoption.
Oh, yeah.
And we would do quarterly utilization conversations. As an IC, I would jump on a call with my entire portfolio, because it was a predictor for us. It gave us an indication of how they were actually utilizing the product as opposed to adopting it, meaning they had 100 licenses and they were actually adopting 80, but only 40% of their users were actually utilizing the product or service. So for us, that was an early warning. That was an indicator of a potential churn. So then we would develop a customer success plan that would get them up to at least 80% usage. And that wasn't an average. That was working on across the entire portfolio. But it did two things for us. It allowed us to look at a continuum to see if there were certain products or features, particularly from a core perspective, that across the board, our customers were not adopting. So that gave us a warning signal from a product perspective. But it also allowed us to predict those customers that were not fully utilizing those products or features. What did it take to get them to a heightened or an optimal utilization? And then what would it take to identify opportunities for products they weren't using, but finding or identifying products that would be utilized better or better serve them. So we actually use it as a metric to predict churn from a utilization standpoint across a multitude of customers, but we drill down to it by customer as opposed to averaging across customers. So I love that.
Yeah, the one
Absolutely.
thing that I think the most brilliant piece of that is something I've been preaching a while myself, is that adoption and utilization are not the same. That you got to have a definition of adoption and a definition of utilization. Your utilization should be what percentage of the, those who have adopted the feature or the product are using it within a certain frequency. You have to get down to understanding what normal frequency is for the usage of this feature. And what that usage tells you is where have they really changed their workflow, their processes to embed your software into those processes. If you have someone that's logged in once, okay, maybe you call that adopted. That feature's adopted or whatever it is. But if they've only used it once in the last month, when the average user uses it 6 times a month, that's not someone that's really getting the value of that feature. Or that's a sign that they really are about to walk. It's one of these things that I love the fact that you separated that, and doing that by percentages is always the best way.
And I think, Tamika, you were about to tee something up, because otherwise I was going to add to that.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, most CS teams, they look at login rates to predict health. Like the program I used to manage, we had a 98% utilization. That's huge, right? As soon as I moved on, though, to another role within the organization, they churned.
So
So
what would you define? What was driving that then, from your perspective? I mean, that's
in,
an impressive utilization rate. Yeah.
ensuring the adoption was always there, like staying in front of the user's face to make sure that they were using or following the workflows that have been established and the guidance that had been given to them, so that we would get better traction with the tool. And so the question that I actually have is, um, so if you're using whatever it is, like a treadmill every day and you never lose weight, is that treadmill successful? And so what are the real signals we should be looking at that actually correlate to revenue? Because that 98%, although impressive, was the adoption high. Were they
Yeah.
getting a return?
So this goes to what I call the customer revenue chain, value chain. I always mix up the title because I keep wanting to put customer success, but there I had to have to break my tongue from saying that to say customer revenue, because it spans actually beyond customer success.
Correct.
But you have to have behavior from the customer that leads to adoption of a feature and then drives utilization of that feature to produce outcomes that then the customer values, that basically has some sort of impact. Your treadmill example says that, yes, I'm using it. So I've got some behavior. I've changed my behavior. I bought it. I'm now utilizing it. But if I don't reach my outcome, my desired state, I don't value it. And therefore, I don't pay for it. And so in your analogy, you have to, at least from my model, you have to hit each of these milestones, each of these pieces, each of those value chain moments to actually drive value that customers will pay for. And so that's what I would say in that case. If you're not reaching the outcomes, there's no way you're going to value what the effort you've put in. As a matter of fact, you're going to look at that treadmill and say, you're costing me more than you're delivering for me, because I have to get up every morning and sweat, and I'm still not losing weight. Now, here's the one caveat I would put in there, because this is how your customers will think. And I've seen this all over. They will blame the treadmill, not the fact that they're eating donuts right after they went and worked out. It doesn't matter. They will blame the treadmill.
So I literally have a YouTube video that's titled "Why Does Customer Success Get Blamed for Everything?" So yeah, even though the customers are eating donuts and still gaining weight, we still get blamed for that factor, even though they're just not. But the through line in all of this between both of these conversations between you, Anthony, and Tamika is it's a behavioral. And
Yep.
for those of you that did not listen to our last podcast around NPS is a vanity metric. It's basically a lie. We talked a lot about that, and we defined some of the metrics that are behavioral that can predict churn. But at the end of the day, what you said, Tamika, is spot on. You were a part of it. Like you said, you were there to ensure that they were following the workflows. It was embedded in there from a utilization standpoint, and they were doing what they needed to do to drive success. That is behavioral. And we'll talk a little bit about that in subsequent slides. Anything on this one? Because the last thing I wanted to, as our little quote here, is value is not created when a product is delivered. Value is created when the customer uses it successfully. So if we go back to the treadmill analogy, if you get on it and you start doing what you need to do, but you have all these other factors and you're not hitting success, then you're not going to lose weight. All right. Anything else on this one?
I have more, but I'll leave it alone.
Oh, okay. All right.
We got things to get to.
There's a
This is
sequel
true.
coming.
This is true. There's a whole nother series at the end. All right. So the other two metrics that is of the total 4 that we're looking at that predict churn, depth of adoption. We've kind of spent some time on this and we touched on this a little bit, but expansion of use cases, features, and workflows. This to me is critical. One of the things that I used to do when I was on the cloud, I would make sure that my team not only looked at, because we had a whole value realization team that would actually go in and really determine if our customers were actually, getting that perceived value that we talked about. And the biggest red flag is we would actually pull up a dashboard showing our customers how many features they actually had turned on within our system. And what was interesting, it was kind of a red, green, and yellow. I mean, we're all kind of Pavlovian, so we gravitate to anything that was red or yellow. The customers would ignore anything that was green, but particularly if it was, if I was doing a QBR, the customer would literally say, okay, help me understand, why are these features red or green? I mean, red or yellow. And I would have to say, well, actually, these are features you do not have turned on. And immediately their spidey antennas would go off for 2 reasons. One, they're like, are we paying for that? Oh, yes, you are paying for that. 2, why aren't they turned on? And I said, it's not important why they aren't turned on or why they're yellow, meaning they're turned on and not using them. What's important is that these features are tied to the value that you indicated you wanted to receive from this product or solution. So if you're not fully optimizing them, then you are leaving money on the table, which is something their Spidey attendees always go back to. And more importantly, you're not fully utilizing this to an optimal value. So if they are not fully embedded in their use cases, or if we not from a product or service, features and workflows, then your adoption and more importantly, utilization, that's a churn risk. The second piece is the stakeholder spread. I know we have a lot to say about that, but I want to go back a little bit more to see if either of you have anything else on the adoption piece that we talked about here, because we talked about it a little bit previously.
My belief is that a healthy customer is a growing customer, meaning
Absolutely.
if they're not expanding, it doesn't mean that they're expanding where you can get a new seat immediately out of them, or that you have now more usage immediately out of them. No, but they should be talking to you about, hey, this is working. Where else can it work? This is when you say you're really working and you're driving the customers towards success, because now they're bringing you into conversation, saying, I love what you're doing. I love what your product is doing. I love how you've driven success. What else can you help us with? Or my favorites, when you're in an EBR and they present their roadmap to you and say, hey, here's the things we're doing. What does that mean for our implementation? How do we need to change that? When you get invited into those conversations or they bring you into their future, that is when you can really drive adoption. When you don't see that, that's almost an indication to me that they've almost thrown you by on the wayside, or you haven't really gotten into their mind share yet, that you're still some tool that's over there that somebody Pete uses and I don't really understand the value. But when you get into their mind share, when you can actually get their thinking about your product, then you are now moving the adoption the way you want to go. There's a thing I call spiritual adoption that happens before the actual adoption. The product adoption is when they start thinking about you in their future. That's spiritual adoption.
I love that, and I want to I want to laser focus on something you said, because we've talked a lot about this, and I'm gonna challenge the people that are on the call. And again, I can't see it, but Tamika, I'm gonna ask you to. I would love for those of you that are on the call, if you are working with the customer, sorry, my screens are going crazy. If you are working with a customer and they let you see their roadmap, whether it's through an EBR, the way Anthony talked about it, a QBR, or as part of any type of success conversation, if you just feel comfortable posting in the chat just the word roadmap, I would love to see how many people on this call are actually having roadmap conversations with their customers. One of the two churn predictors for me and expansion opportunities was the ability to look at a customer's roadmap. So first and foremost, what you said, Anthony, what I love was when I would have a customer pull up a roadmap and my product or service showed up on the roadmap. You are in. It is beyond spiritual at that point. You are embedded with that customer. So if they are planning with you in mind, you have a strategic relationship with that customer. The second thing is, if that is the situation and you're not on the roadmap, that's a red flag for you. But to Anthony's point, more importantly, if they're not comfortable having that conversation with you, that means there's a trust factor. So that's something, again, that's another red flag. But more importantly, when I see us on the roadmap, and I see that there are products and services that they're not utilizing, that's an expansion opportunity. So roadmap conversations, and I don't know, Tamika, if you're getting anybody that's, and you don't have to tell me their names, but I'd love to see if there's, just as a kind of account, how many people are actually saying they're having those conversations with their customer. And if none of you are having those conversations, I would start thinking about churn. All right,
we've
anything
got
else?
one.
We've got one. Okay, bravo. Please, pat yourself on the back because you are an outlier. But if you really want to be strategic, you really want to drive, expansion opportunities and mitigate churn, you need to be talking to your customers about their roadmap. And I know all of them are going to, I bet if I asked everybody how many of you are having roadmap conversations about your product with your customers, the number would go up. That's fine. That's great. But if that is not necessarily the conversation you really want to have if you're being strategic. All right. Anything else on the adoption piece? Because I was going to take us to the stakeholder.
Go ahead.
I know you got so much to say here. Okay, so from a stakeholder spread, this is something that you've talked about quite a bit on the call, is that the ability to be multi-threaded and the ability to have conversations with multiple personas. So growth across active users and roles, again, to me, that's at the operational level. It's very tactical. When you talked earlier about your customers that are using it and they love it and they're adopting it, that is wonderful. But to your point, how multi-threaded are you within your organization? And I kind of talked about this on other calls, but when I've had customers come to me and tell me they don't have a budget in their particular department for my product, then what I want to do is, oh yeah, this conversation. Then I want to say, well, what other departments or business units might potentially have the budget? And if you've developed a strategic relationship, to your point, Anthony, they're going to bring you into that conversation and say, my department doesn't, but I know that this department does. Let's go over and have a conversation with them. And then depth and breadth of stakeholder alignment. Again, this speaks to, you need to be talking to every possible persona within your customer, not just the ones that utilize your service on a end user basis. So I'll stop there because I know you have a lot to say about it, and we'll kind of go there.
This to me begins even how your company defines value. And that it begins in that conversation. If you have one value statement for your company and you cannot morph that to different personas, then you have a problem. I go back to, I'm a jobs to be done guy. And so when I go back to the jobs to be done, you have to understand who's doing the work and what is the outcome that they're looking for. And so while you may know what the decision maker is looking for, but you need to decompose that to what is that administrator need, the person who's administrating your solution for the company, for your customer, what do they need? The people that are using it, what do they need and what's the outcome? When you can build that hierarchy of value, that gives you a framework now to walk into an organization and be able to nicely pivot and have the same value message, but have it resonate for every single person in the org. And so if the CS leaders or the CSMs don't have that ability today, I challenge the leaders to go all the way back to the marketing team or whoever came up with your value statement and align with them on the personas and how do you align that value, or at least speak that value statement to those personas, what matters to them. Because if you don't have that ability to do that, or your marketing team doesn't have that ability, it leaves you not as multi-threaded as you need to be.
So I love that. What I do is I go to my team and I say, tell me the WIFM for your customer. And then I want you to tell me the WIFM across all the multiple personas within your customer.
Yep.
And if they can't do that, that's a problem. And I want to be able, to your point, to say, okay, if the CFO for your company came to me and said, what is the value prop for your solution within my company? That's one conversation. But if the head of engineering for your company came to me and asked me that same conversation, it's going to be the personas are different, the value props are different. And our CS teams need to be comfortable having that multi-threaded or multi-layered conversation. Now, it might just be a slight nuance. The finance team, they're going to want to look at the numbers with regards to, are you making them money or are you saving them money? But the engineering team is probably trying to understand, are you making my team more productive? Are you helping me align with my customer in a way that is productive and optimizes the solution that I'm providing to them? The nuances are different, but our teams need to have the ability to have those conversations across layers, across roles, and across teams. That is true depth, breadth,
100%.
and stakeholder alignment. I love that.
Yep.
Value is not created when a product is delivered. We kind of talked about that. Go ahead.
Oh, absolutely. The reason why I push this at the company level, now, as we all know, sometimes you can't get it at the company level, which means CS has to figure it out on their own.
Right.
But the ideal scenario is that you get this all the way baked into the entire organization, so it appears in the marketing collateral. It appears in the product, where the product actually knows who's logging in. Oh, you're the administrator. So now let me communicate value to you in the product in a way that you understand. Now, when we say this, we're not saying there's different values. It could be the same value, just expressed differently.
Correct.
It's just, if we're going with your analogy, or the one that you gave, making the engineering team more productive, the engineering leader may want to hear, how many, man hours are you saving me?
What's my LOE? How do I reduce my
That's
LOE?
exactly. So that's what they're looking for.
Yep.
But that same man hour savings can be translated into dollars for the CFO.
Correct.
So you can have the same value and just express it differently to have it speak to the different audiences. But this is where you have to, in my mind, if you don't have the support for from your company on this, absolutely, you got to figure it out on your own. CS has to figure it out on their own, or the account managers have to figure out on their own. But ideally, you can work with the rest of the company to get this baked into every conversation and every touch point.
Absolutely, positively. Okay, I hate to do this, but we are running out of time.
Sure.
So I'm going to start wrapping us up. So anything else on this? Because I think we definitely, like I said, the series continues throughout the rest of the year. So we're going to have this conversation again because there's so much to unpack. All right. So with that said, at the end of the day, all CS metrics lie when used alone. The truth metrics are signals, not strategies. CS value is created between the numbers, and revenue-centric CS connects behavior. We talked about that, outcome to dollars. So I'm going to open it up, and I don't know if there are any particular questions, Tamika, or we can maybe touch very briefly on some of the questions that we had. Any questions in the chat?
There are no questions in the chat, but I have one question.
Go ahead.
Going off of everything y'all talked about, or where the definition of value, the types of value, when it comes to expectation setting, like this is something I feel like the value conversation should be held before the deal is even closed. How does CS get into that conversation when they're in most cases, most organizations keep them completely separate and not as collaborative partners.
So this is why I was pushing it to be a company-wide conversation.
Yeah.
Because when you're in sales, and I have friends and leaders who have let me see kind of what a sales leader sees. And when you're in sales and you're challenged with the acquisition, you do not want to introduce anything that may slow up the deal. And so prematurely talking about the future renewal may actually hinder the sale. So you almost have to make sure the people you bring into the sales process understand that this is a sales process, not a renewal process, not an implementation process. So until we in CS can learn to talk sales, we won't be invited into those conversations. Now, you can talk sales without losing your CS background. I'm not saying you become, someone that's willing to close the deal at any point, but your job when you're brought into the deal before signature is to help close the deal. So that's one thing we have to fix. So the indirect way is probably the best way. Work with marketing. If you can get the right value conversations going on where marketing is supporting the more unified view of value, marketing then influences sales. And so what I found to be most successful for me before I can get it as a company-wide conversation, and when I got it as a company-wide conversation led by the CEO, that worked best. But when I didn't have that, I went through marketing. By getting marketing aligned, that can actually influence sales. It's not a direct influence, but it's an indirect influence that works over time.
So I love that, except I took a somewhat contrarian thought, because as we all know, most companies are led not by, and I know I'm gonna get some interesting comments. They're led by sales as opposed to marketing. They have the bigger budget. They get to go to club. So what I have done where I've been successful is I've gone to the CS, the sales leader, usually someone that's my peer. So in my previous role, I was working with the CRO, and I said, here is the deal. If you want to close existing deals faster, you need to bring CS in at a point where you feel like there's a high probability of close. They will not be there to cause friction in your deal. They will be there to listen. And really, CROs that are really laser focused and understand the value of customer success will bring us into the conversation early and keep us there. It does two things. It embeds us and starts building that relationship with the customer. It gives, the second thing, and most importantly, is it gives sales a trust factor with us because they see that we are focused on helping them drive revenue. And then what I do is, once the sales leader and myself come to a value, I would call it sort of a value mission. What we do is we go back to marketing and we socialize that to marketing. So we come as part of the go-to-market team. And that's a through line that we surface up to our ELT team. So that's the way that I've done it. And it's been very successful, starting with sales, coming up with that value prop from our perspective. That's a joint value discussion from sales and customer success, and then socializing that with marketing and leveling it up. All right. I know we are pretty much out of time. Go ahead.
What I love about that is that both ways work. It depends on where it depends on where your CS team is. And what I mean by that, if your CS team cannot talk sales and may slow down the deal, you may have to go the other way. And so you have to look at where's your team today? If they can talk sales, if they can sit on that call and realize this is a sales call, not an implementation call, so to speak, not a risk call, it's a sales call. If they can do that, work directly with sales. Absolutely. But if you're not there yet, go the other way.
100%. One of my favorite quotes right now, and this is sort of tangential, but I'm going to keep saying on every single call. If you're in customer success and you can't speak the language of the CRO and the CFO, it's going to be hard for you to really thrive as a CCO. All right, so we are pretty much out of time. Just quick, as Tamika mentioned, one of the free giveaways is if you subscribe to my customer success YouTube channel, I do have a TT value worksheet that I'm happy to provide to you. Just grab my email address from my about section, put worksheet in the topic, and I will send that to you. And then, more importantly, this is a series, as we talked about. We have covered the top 2. We still have 3 more. And then, Anthony, do you want to kind of tell us what's coming up? Because we also have another podcast next week.
Deidre and I are very busy. We have a revenue great customer success podcast that comes out. We've moved it now to once a month, but our episode to next week is how do you turn sales alignment into NRR growth? So it builds on the very thread we just pulled on. How do you align with sales on value, on process, on even talking points, and even handoffs? So that's, tune in next week. Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern, New York time, we will dive into that specifically.
Looking forward to that discussion. All right. So we're closing up. This will be posted, but this is the series. We have a fabulous lineup, guys, for the rest of the year. So please keep tuning in and watch this space. I'm not going to go through all of them because we are pretty much out of time. But the other thing that we would like to do is please connect with both Anthony and myself. If you're on this call, you're probably connected with me, but make sure that you screen grab this. And then the last thing is the shameless plug for Anthony and I. We are, as he said, very busy. We have both been nominated for the Customer-Led Growth Top 100 Award. So please vote for us. The voting link is at the bottom here, but you can go to our respective LinkedIn pages and vote for us. We would really, really appreciate it. And with that said, this is a wrap for Customer Success is a Lie and Why We Should Keep Believing It. Is there anything else, guys, that I've missed?
I just need more time in a day.
We all need more time in a day. We do. Okay, well, with that said, we are officially done, unless, Tamika, you have anything else.
Nope. Be sure to vote, and the link to the YouTube is in the comments.
Thank you very much, everyone, and thanks for your participation and your continued support. And thank you, Tamika, and thank you, Anthony, for continuing to tolerate me on these calls.
Oh, it's
All
an
right,
easy job. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, guys. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye. Thanks.